us now an old friend. Scott Walker, former Wisconsin governor, now president of Young America's Foundation. Scott Walker, it is good to see you. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you. Good to be with you, Larry.
So, Scott, I'm going to give the railroad union a pass because I think they're trying to catch up to Biden inflation, okay? I'm going to give them a pass. Maybe I'm right, maybe I'm wrong, but on the surface it doesn't sound so bad. But, what I want to talk to you about, and you took on the public sector unions in Wisconsin, but the Bidens are giving unions in general, private unions, particularly construction, they're giving them everything but the kitchen sink. They're applying Bacon Davis wage increases to things that have never been applied before. They're mixing tax policy with construction policy and so forth. And that, I think, is a very bad idea. Your thoughts on this Biden union policy?
I agree with you on both counts. One, I don't blame the rail workers for trying to keep up with inflation, or as you call it, Bidenflation, because it's out of control and it makes sense that they're trying to do that. But this unfair advantage, tipping the scale, as the president himself, Joe Biden, said the other day, he wouldn't be there if it weren't for the unions and the union cronies, the bosses. The average working man and women in this country, I think, deserve a good wage, but they need to get it in return by working hard and working with their employers. And the biggest problem is what we see is the advantage of tipping the scale that they're doing at the federal government level.
National Labor Relations Board, they're trying to, stop the secret ballot in these union elections. They're cooperating with union leaders in these elections. They've called elections off. They've called do-overs. Former Labor Secretary told me today it's the most aggressive pro-union NLRB in half a century.
Well, and we see it not only in traditional places, you're seeing it at other places. Amazon, even others who weren't normally in the mix on this, are seeing exactly how aggressive this administration is with their political allies out there. And look, that's just tipping the scale in the wrong direction. We know at a time when prices are high for food, for fuel, for housing, certainly for other commodities out there, the last thing we need to do is be adding higher cost. Particularly, a lot of that's going into the hands of the elite few, these union bosses. And it gets even worse when you look at what they're doing with the government unions. I, for one, actually think there shouldn't be any government unions. Oddly enough, I agree with Franklin Delano Roosevelt on that one. FDR was right. We don't need government unions. But they're the ones that were responsible for shutting down the economy in the first place, and in many cases, keeping our schools closed for the past year and a half to 2 years. So all sorts of problems with union bosses. We need to be pro-taxpayer and pro-worker, but not pro-union boss.
What did you do in Wisconsin to review the bidding? You stepped in. You took a lot of heat for it, but eventually you won. And you started this, you stopped this collective bargaining charade where the taxpayers were never really represented at the bargaining table with respect to the government public unions.
That's right. We took the power out of the hands of the big government union bosses and shifted it to the hardworking people, the hardworking taxpayers at the state and local level who now are in charge of what happens of their government, not just a few union bosses along the way. And that made a world of difference. We've seen the biggest increase of any state in the nation. The biggest decrease in union membership over the past 20 years has been in Wisconsin. At the same time, we've seen over $15 billion worth of savings for state and local taxpayers. And most of the private sector, including union employees, have actually seen an increase in their wages because that's when we got the government out of the way and left it up to the free market.
I agree with you about the government unions wholeheartedly. I don't have anything principally against the private sector unions. I mean, I think they should be free, by the way. They should be free to determine this. 27 states are right to work nowadays. They shouldn't have to give a big chunk of their paycheck to these left-wing union bosses. That's a big gripe I have. But just on this question of Davis-Bacon, which I'm sure you're familiar with, this is now being applied. Yeah. If even the chip companies, the semiconductor companies, if they don't use Davis-Bacon wage rates for construction, they're not going to get their tax credits. And even on the Green New Deal stuff, they're going to give out bonuses if you do use Davis-Bacon wages. Now, that is an incursion, an encroachment we've never seen before.
Not only is it politically wrong, but it's wrong for the taxpayers. It's sticking it to taxpayers. Beyond what we did for government-based unions, we did right to work, which is really giving every worker the right to choose. We're one of those 27 states you talked about. Hard to believe in the progressive blue state of Wisconsin, but we did it. But the other part at the state and local level is called prevailing wage, which is very much like Davis-Bacon out there. We reformed that as well, which keeps the prices of government projects and programs down. It is phenomenal for the taxpayers. And yet, as I mentioned, for those unions that are still there in the private sector who are providing good product, who are training their members, who are doing the right thing and partnering with their employers, their wages have gone up over the last few years. So you can do it without giving that unfair advantage to the labor bosses. Be pro-worker and pro-taxpayer. That's the best recipe going forward.
All right, well said. Thank you. Former Governor Scott Walker of Wisconsin.